communications and information to provide a few words. Over to you, Alan.
Great. Thank you, Jaysha, and good morning, everyone. Good afternoon if you're not in our time zone. And we're so glad to welcome you all to NTIA's listening session on the Public Wireless Supply Chain and Innovation Fund. We really appreciate your presence and your attention and participation as we're launching this effort. So today's session is designed to collect public feedback that will inform the development and implementation of the Innovation Fund grant program. We're going to cover several topics today throughout the session, including potential grant criteria and project types, as well as how we can overcome obstacles to the adoption of open, interoperable, standards-based radio access networks. First, I'd like to say a word about why we're here today. As many of you know, a small group of vendors today make up the majority of the wireless infrastructure marketplace. The lack of vendor diversity and competition reduces supply chain resilience and security. It contributes to higher prices. It makes it challenging for new innovative companies to break into the market. And as some of the vendors' equipment also poses an unacceptable risk to the national security of the United States and our allies. One driver for this is China, which has been sheltering and subsidizing national champion suppliers for years, creating global security risks to the wireless equipment supply chain that we cannot ignore. It is time to secure a more innovative future. If we can give the private sector the tools to compete in the next 5 or 10 years, we can ensure that the 5G market and its successor technologies will grow to reach their full potential here at home and around the globe. That means supporting open and interoperable networks. One example of an innovative approach is open radio access networks, or Open RAN. By moving to open architecture, software-based wireless technologies, we believe we can bring more diversity to the supply chain and provide more secure alternatives for consumers. We know there are still barriers to effectively deploying Open RAN at scale. Specifications are still under development. We need more research and testing to advance adoption. Interoperability and security are areas that may benefit from further research. The whole idea is that this $1.5 billion public wireless supply chain innovation fund will help us overcome these barriers and advance open, interoperable, and standard-based network adoption. We anticipate that this historic fund will support research and development, as well as potentially trials, pilots, lab testing, and it will help us gather valuable data on Open RAN successes. The truth is, we can't do this without you. We need your input. And today's session is our chance and your chance to inform the approach that we're taking with the fund. How can we structure the grant program to enable your success? What types of projects should the Innovation Fund support? What obstacles to Open RAN deployment should be our top priorities? So help us answer these questions and identify potential challenges. Together, if we do this right, we can catalyze more resilient, secure, and cost-effective wireless networks. So I'll just say in conclusion, thank you all for joining today's session. I want to say special thanks to our colleagues who will join Jaysha, who kicked off the program, in leading the discussion. We've got Phil Murphy, who's a senior advisor in the Office of the Assistant Secretary here at NTIA, and has been one of our real leaders in this launch of our Innovation Fund, along with Sarah Skaluba, who's a senior policy advisor in our Office of Policy Analysis and Development, and has also been instrumental in kicking off this effort. And I know we've got a bunch of other NTIA staff on the line, including, I believe, our Deputy Assistant Secretary, April Delaney. So you have our full attention. Thank you again for joining us, and I will turn it back over to Jaysha.
Thank you so much for those remarks, Alan. And again, welcome everyone to NTIA's Public Wireless Supply Chain Innovation Fund listening session. So my name is Jaysha Ray. I am the Associate Administrator for International Affairs at NTIA, and it's really my pleasure to be with you all today. Now, in line with the executive branch's policy to promote the development of Open RAN, alongside other policies and architectures that support 5G supplier diversity, NTIA is leading the implementation of this historic $1.5 billion program. My team has been hard at work over the past few months thinking about how this program can best address the risks posed by a consolidated market and facilitate a multi-vendor ecosystem. Now, as Assistant Secretary Alan Davidson mentioned, this program is really a top priority for the Department of Commerce. And we look forward to hearing from all of you today on how the Innovation Fund can effectively boost innovation, foster competition, and create a more resilient supply chain. In addition to today's session, NTIA is also soliciting feedback on the Innovation Fund through our Public Request for Comments, or RFC, that closes this Friday. We encourage all stakeholders on this call to submit feedback via the RFC if you haven't done so already. Now, both of these processes, today's listening session and the RFC, will help to inform development and implementation of this $1.5 billion program. Since I know our implementation timeline is really top of mind for many of you, I will note that we anticipate launching our first NOFO, or Notice of Funding, in spring of this year to meet our August 2023 statutory deadline. Of course, NTIA will continue to share information on this topic as we're able. And in the meantime, please do not hesitate to reach out to the team at innovationfund@ntia.gov with any questions. And please continue to refer to our website, ntia.gov, which will have the most up-to-date information on this program moving forward. And you can also join our distribution list. Now, before kicking off today's discussion, I will flag a few housekeeping reminders. So first of all, please note that this meeting will be recorded and posted online following today's session. Automated closed captioning will also be available for those of you using the Teams app. We highly recommend attendees use the Teams app to connect to our session, as it will allow for more convenient participation, higher quality audio, and a smoother experience. We also ask that your display names reflect your full name, as well as the name of your organization for the convenience of the organizers and the other attendees. If you would like to participate, we kindly ask that you use the Teams raise hand function or press *5 to raise your hand if dialing in by phone. Please keep your hand raised until a moderator calls on you. You'll also need to come off mute before presenting. So for folks dialing in by phone, please press *6 to unmute yourself. We also kindly ask that you identify yourself and your organization before speaking, and to limit your remarks to no longer than 5 minutes. As a reminder, you can email innovationfund@ntia.gov during today's session if you are unable to join the queue or experiencing technical difficulties. So now, with no further ado, we will now turn to topic number 1, which is addressing key challenges. So topic 1 is really going to explore how the Innovation Fund can best address challenges to open and interoperable standards-based network adoption. NTIA welcomes views on this topic, particularly as related to interoperability, standards, workforce development, certification, security, energy efficiency, and supply chain challenges, among other issues. So to begin, we have a few folks that are pre-queued, so they'll kick things off, and then we'll open the floor to any others. So if you would like to join the queue, please raise your hand, and we will add you to the list. And again, if dialing in by phone, you will need to press *5 to raise your hand. So one last reminder that today's session is recorded, and we kindly ask folks to limit any remarks to 5 minutes. So first up, we have Chris Boyer from AT&T, and I will note that we have Cable Labs and Dell coming up after that. So please, Chris, if you're on the line, could we turn to you? But you might not be on the line. Do we have Chris Boyer?
Chris, if you're on the line, could you please raise your hand?
Oh, I see him.
There
All
we
right.
go.
Thank you, Chris. Please go ahead.
Great, thanks, Jaysha. Sorry about that. I had a unmute and get the camera turned on there. Well, good morning, everyone. I really appreciate you giving me the opportunity here to speak and talk about AT&T's perspective on Open RAN. And I know we're in this section today on challenges, but I'm going to talk a little bit about both the challenges and some targeted areas where we think the Innovation Fund can help advance ORAN. So first, just to talk a little bit about where AT&T stands on Open RAN. I think, as most folks know, certainly on this call, that AT&T is a founding member of both the ORAN Alliance and the Open RAN Policy Coalition, which was very influential in driving the development of the Wireless Innovation Fund. So we are fully supportive of the ongoing development of Open RAN. But that said, and this shouldn't be a surprise to anyone who's heard me speak about this in the past, there still remain some challenges with making Open RAN suitable for deployment in large-scale macro public wireless networks. National carriers such as AT&T, we serve a vast number of subscribers, a broad range of customer types from consumers to enterprise to public safety. Our customers rely on our networks every day. One need look no further than the COVID-19 pandemic to understand the critical nature of our networks. So for these reasons, while AT&T continues to be a leader and a strong advocate for Open RAN, deployment in our network is going to take time and is dependent upon resolving myriad of issues which are key for deployment at scale. Thus, my comments this morning are really through the lens of how can we best accelerate Open RAN for national operators such as AT&T. To be clear, we all know there's deployments happening today. I'm sure many of the other speakers will certainly address those. And we're very optimistic that a lot of the challenges that we're seeing today will be resolved over time. And we think the Wireless Innovation Fund can play a key role in shortening the time horizons to address some of those challenges. So very quickly, just to talk about what we see as some of the challenges, I'll start with interoperability. Deployable open wireless networks require availability of interoperable components. There is non-trivial bilateral work that needs to be done between vendors or among multiple vendors, and that work needs to be shepherded through by a neutral party. In many cases today, that is done by the operator with their vendor partners. However, each operator can only really influence their own chosen group of vendors. Thus, there is a key need for more interoperability work and integration work amongst the broader ecosystem of ORAN to ensure that all the piece parts are truly open and interchangeable. There's also a lack of pre-certification. So pre-certified combinations of piece parts like the RU, the DU, the CU, those are not yet currently available. This means that operators who want to deploy Open RAN, we basically have to work with our vendors and drive one-off interoperability integration efforts with our chosen vendors, often at our cost, which leads to significant challenges in terms of time to market. And in that case, can make some of the traditional kind of single vendor solutions appear less risky and less expensive, even if that's not necessarily true in the long run. So pre-certification is another key challenge. Performance and scalability, as I mentioned earlier, large carrier networks, they require equipment that can scale and support millions of subscribers. While we have seen some Open RAN deployments, as noted, there is a need for data on the experiences of different operators in terms of performance at scale, so operators can make informed decisions about the viability of Open RAN in large macro networks. Also support for advanced features and capabilities. So national operators like AT&T, we have a very rich network that covers a full range of customer types with varying needs. Thus, understanding and demonstrating how Open RAN equipment can fulfill those requirements is critical to large-scale deployment. And then finally, there's somewhat of a catch-22 when it comes to cost. In order for Open RAN to really be cost competitive, it's dependent upon large-scale deployments. But of course, some of those deployments are only possible if the cost is more competitive in the first instance. So there are challenges around the component parts that go into a lot of the equipment and making them more cost competitive. And lastly, I'll just mention total cost of operations. This is the issue of integrating multiple operators into a solution can be a challenge. Large wireless operators need to be reasonably certain that making changes in their network will not drive incremental TCO requirements, and that knowledge can only really be gained through a greater experience with Open RAN. So those are just a list of some of the challenges that we see. Very briefly, I'll touch on some areas where we think the Innovation Fund can help address those concerns. I'll just run down a list. Open front haul integration testing, as I mentioned earlier, interoperability is a key issue. Integration amongst vendors is a critical issue. So projects that the fund can support that will get to the issue of open front haul integration. Projects supporting things like network management and analytics. This is the development of things like Open RAN service management and orchestration capabilities. Projects targeted at virtual RANs, which go to things such as systems integration and cross vendor automation are key challenges with developing VRANs. Projects focused on accelerating ORAN and brownfield. So this is the issue of, how do we take the installed base of equipment that is currently closed and proprietary, and how can NTIA leverage the fund to foster brownfield deployment, sponsoring projects focused on interoperability between ORAN, alliance compliant equipment, and legacy RAN technology. And then the last couple items are issues around the radio intelligent controller and service management orchestration integration, multi-vendor function integration, so integration between multiple venues, so grants directed towards a means to support integration on an ongoing basis. So it's not a one-off, right? You don't integrate between vendors as a one-off. There's the ongoing lifecycle management and capabilities that are necessary. All of these things would benefit the entire ecosystem. So I know that's a lot to digest. I was trying to keep it to 5 minutes, but we're going to speak to many of these issues and AT&T's comments in response to the RFC, and I'm looking forward to the conversation continuing this morning. Thanks.
Thank you so much for those remarks, Chris. With no further ado, we'll next be turning to David Debrecht from Cable Labs, followed by Dell and then Ericsson. So over to you, David, if you're on the line.
I am. Thank you very much. I had to get the camera unmuted there. So yeah, David Debrecht from Cable Labs. I've only been with Cable Labs for a little over 2 years, but I spent most of my career at Nokia for about 25 years, working R&D in various aspects there. So I'm very much tied into the mobile industry. Yeah, Cable Labs, we've been investing heavily in mobile over the last 5 to 10 years. And you might ask yourself, Cable Labs, what do you have to do with mobile? Because I get that question all the time. We were a member-driven nonprofit organization, and our members are basically cable industry providers. But over half of our cable industry providers, the Comcast, the Charters of the world, are also mobile providers, whether they're an MVNO in those cases or other members are folks like Telefonica, Rogers, Vodafone in Europe. So we're a global innovation center, and we have a lot of members who are also mobile operators or very traditional mobile operators. We have an arm of Cable Labs called Curio that was the first OTIC or Open RAN Test and Integration Center here in the U.S. So we've been working with this space for quite a while. As a matter of fact, when I joined, we did a big kickoff of heavy investing in this area. So what I want to talk about today, real quick, is we are responding as well. So there'll be plenty of comments into our response to the RFC. But I want to talk a little bit about today what we've seen over the last 2 years in this space, and then talk about the ecosystem needs and what the challenges are. So if you don't know, we actually were the host lab for NTIA ITS's 5G challenge that was funded by DoD last year, and we're doing it again this year. And then we also ran the ORAN Plug Fest here in the US for the ORAN Alliance. So we have quite a lot of experience over the last 18 to 24 months in understanding what's going on in the space. Give you a real quick view of what the 5G challenge was if you don't know. What we did was we brought in vendors and tested them in a kind of a wrap around environment, tested the interfaces on both sides of the RU, DU, and CU, made sure they were validated against the profile that we set and said, you must be compliant to these things. And then after that, if you made it past that stage, we threw vendors together for the first time who had never integrated before into a final round, and we allowed them to try to show what they could do in that final round and how far they could get down the integration path. And I'll talk a little bit about that here in just a second. So it was a pretty unique kind of environment. Overall, I would say my evaluation is that the vendor ecosystem is developing well, but it is not mature. So very, very similar to the previous comments, there needs to be more investment and more acceleration and more work to bring it up to speed, to show the performance levels, and to make that interoperability a whole lot easier and better. In general, we had good performance from the vendors during the challenge and the last Plug Fest. Not everybody is on the same level. Everybody's in their own development cycles, but by and large, we saw good performance. We did demonstrate that you could get end-to-end multi-vendor deployments with a different core, with a different CU, with a different DU, with a different RU. So 4 different vendors in the lineup. And we got a full end-to-end call going and good performance on that within 5 weeks. So that gives you kind of a time frame that it is possible, if you do it and approach it the right way, it is possible to get that interoperability. We demonstrated not only those main interfaces, but also the ability to do XN handovers between 2 different CUs, which was something a little bit new. And we also validated the E1 and O2 interfaces with the RIC. So again, overall, what we've seen over the last 18 months is great progress in how it's going, but it's not quite ready for prime time when it comes to deploying massive environments similar to the previous comments. Overall, what does the ecosystem need? It needs alignment of standards and options. As we all know, standards offers 1,000 different things you could or couldn't do, options you could or couldn't take when you go do these interfaces. We need to limit that, and we need to create profiles. And I don't know if that's 1 profile, I don't know if that's 10 profiles, but it's certainly not 100 profiles. That you create these profiles that you can then go do some very specific compliance-based interoperability testing to pre-cert, as opposed to one-off system integration every single time you want to bring 2 different vendors together. So we see that as a critical need to drive the ecosystem and accelerate it. We need to drive down those SI costs because, as was previously stated, you don't want to trade lower cost because you have more vendors in your environment with SI costs for every time you go deploy, because those are ongoing costs and repeatable costs every time you have new software put into the network. So we need to drive that to a minimum, which is the compliance-based interoperability that I just mentioned. From a deployment, we also need to get more deployments out there and see what the real performance is. So putting a live network out there, see what the performance is, see where we can enhance that performance and what the interface evaluations look like to make sure that we can take those interfaces and say, yep, to do better performance, we need to tweak it this way. Maybe the profile is not quite right to do higher performance. Those types of things we have not done yet. So that's something that needs to be done. More investment in common and virtualized platforms. So in our experience over the last 18 to 24 months doing this, we found that most vendors are bringing bare metal to their operations, saying, yep, we got software, put it on my bare metal, and you're good to go. And it does work. But if you truly want to have an open interoperable interface so that you can just take anybody's software, plug it into a cloud-based deployment, Kubernetes-based or whatever, we need to have more development there so that we can actually progress that part of the ecosystem. And then finally,
hey David, sorry to interrupt you. If
yep.
you could start wrapping it up pretty quickly, we're at the 5-minute mark.
Yep, I got one more. And the last one that I was going to say was vendors need more direction on requirements and more investment. They're struggling because they're very small. They don't have billions of dollars to go spend in this. So we need that more direction on what the requirements are and how to actually get that more investment to make that happen. Sorry about the going over for a couple seconds, but that's what I got.
Great. Thank you so much for those remarks, David. We will quickly move on to Dell. We have Dennis Hoffman, Senior VP and GM from Telecom Systems. Dennis, are you on? And just to flag, we'll have Erickson followed by Mavenir after. Over to you, Dennis.
Thanks very much. I'm here. Can you see me okay?
Yes.
Great. Thanks, Alan, Jasha, Phil, team, for the opportunity to comment. I'm Dennis Hoffman. I'm responsible for Dell Technologies telecom business. So over the past 3 years, we've had the opportunity to work closely with the largest and most innovative wireless operators as they embrace open architecture, from their network cores to the edge and ultimately the RAN. I'd like to use this 5 minutes with you today to share our learnings from these engagements and the associated implications for the fund. A mentor of mine once told me that businesses only buy things for one or more of 3 reasons: make money, save money, or reduce operating risk. ORAN is where it is today for a reason. It doesn't yet do any of those things. And while it's clearly a question of when, not if, that will happen, ORAN today costs more, doesn't clearly drive revenue, and presents significant adoption risk. Consequently, ORAN acceleration is a system problem of slower than demand from network operators, for the reasons Chris mentioned, coupled with inadequate supply from the technology industry. When it comes to supply, there are clear technology and integration gaps, which we've delineated here and in our written response to the RFC, and they have to be closed. Quickly addressing these gaps is key to realizing the price performance advantages promised by O-RAN. But there's another type of gap to be aware of. To reduce the risk of O-RAN adoption to acceptable levels, network operators want to hold a single vendor responsible for Open RAN performance, reliability, and security. It is therefore imperative that Open RAN solutions are developed, integrated, and supported by companies that operators can depend on in production and at scale. So our challenge here is to execute a program that swiftly and effectively addresses both the supply side and the demand side issues systemically. I'm talking about the what, the how, and importantly, the who. On the supply side, what we're talking about is kickstarting an entire open ecosystem. To do so, we need to fill specific technology gaps, performance, features, cost competitiveness that have been listed already. These are in areas like open radio units, O-RAN software, and layer 1 acceleration. We also have to provide a mechanism to ensure component openness and interop, and make sure those components are engineered and integrated into solutions from at-scale suppliers who can and will support the open network the way carriers require. On the demand side, we need to provide an incentive for operators to overcome the very real risk of new technology adoption. Nothing catalyzes a capitalist industry in terms of innovation like a customer. This fund needs to help make sure there are some. Finally, we have a unique opportunity, birds with one stone, to accelerate the formation of the open O-RAN ecosystem and do it in such a way that we help restore U.S. competitiveness in an absolutely critical technology area. The beauty of this opportunity is that the U.S. is already the clear global leader in software-defined, we call it cloud infrastructure. And that's precisely what the world operators are asking for as they modernize their networks. Bottom line, the key to effectiveness and impact of the innovation. Yes.
Sorry about that. Your connection is a little bit spotty, so I recommend turning off your video just so we can, hear your audio and get that substance as best possible.
How's that?
We'll let you know in a couple of seconds. Right now, it sounds pretty good.
Okay. So finally, we've got a unique opportunity to kill two birds with one stone, to accelerate the formation of the O-RAN ecosystem and do it in such a way that we help restore U.S. competitiveness in an absolute critical technology area. The beauty of this opportunity is that we're already the clear global leader in software-defined, open hardware-based infrastructure, cloud, and that's precisely what the world's network operators are asking for as they modernize their networks. The bottom line is the key to effectiveness and impact of the Innovation Fund is balancing supply and demand side investment, and on the supply side, not only the specific programs in which we invest, but also the location and scale of the vendors we select to deliver them. Network operators have very unique businesses. They're responsible for indispensable, critical, often national infrastructure. The open ecosystem that will effectively serve them as the RAN disaggregates will be similarly unique, solution-oriented, at scale, and carrier grade. Again, you all for the opportunity to comment.
Great. Thank you so much for those remarks, Dennis. No further ado, we'll move on to Ericsson. We have Mike Murphy, who should be on the line. Mike, if you would unmute and turn on your camera. And then just to note, on deck, we have Mavenir and then Microsoft. Mike, are you on the line?
Mike, if you're on the line, could you please raise your hand?
Okay, we see Mike. Are you able to unmute? Oh, there you are. Great.
Okay.
Please, thank
it was
you.
all it was locked for me. Okay, so without further ado, so good morning. Thank you for the opportunity to speak to you today. So I'm Mike Murphy, and I'm CTO for North America Ericsson. And my comments reflect a subset of the items noted in our reply to the RFC. And also, I agree with the previous speakers, Chris, David, and David, or Dennis, sorry. So Ericsson is the largest supplier of 5G wireless communications equipment in the US. We have about 9,000 employees, 20 research labs, and a state-of-the-art manufacturing facility in Louisville, Texas. By the way, near all of our US demand for baseband products is sourced from that factory, and an increasing percent of our mid-band radios. We're also the #1 contributor to the O-RAN Alliance specifications in 2022. So clearly, Ericsson's a major contributor to US 5G leadership and to Open RAN solutions. So we believe that the move to Open RAN should continue to be under the umbrella of market-led competition. And within that framework, we suggest that funding not be tied to country of origin, but rather trusted suppliers, and shouldn't be a substitute for venture capital funds used to nurture private companies or even large companies trying to enter the industry to keep a fair playing field. From a technology perspective, we see the need to work on some items both in the near and the mid to long term. However, in both cases, we suggest funding be more directed towards research versus development, so as to be more aimed at expanding the ecosystem versus tactical projects. In near-term considerations, there's a few areas that need attention, namely security, performance, and interoperability. So let me expand on those. So 3 national cybersecurity agencies, the US, EU, and Germany, all have formally reported that adherence to current O-RAN specifications would result in an increase in vulnerabilities versus systems deployed today. So we suggest that NTIA research funds could be applied to continually reassess those vulnerabilities, move towards zero trust architectures, and support stringent testing facilities to ensure Open RAN solutions are protected against attacks, including those from malicious state actors. In performance, systems deployed today actually exceed the performance of systems developed using current O-RAN specifications in certain scenarios, not all, but in certain scenarios. This is manifested by reduced uplink throughput and high fronthaul capacity demand. So for that reason, a new specification is being developed by the O-RAN Alliance. So the NTIA would do well to support research into this area, possibly through simulations and test beds to ensure the best possible performance of solutions when they're deployed at scale. Finally, I think everybody mentioned interoperability, and that brings both technical and cost challenges to Open RAN solutions. So we recommend the NTIA consider supporting broad, ongoing interoperability test beds. These would be to support the mix and match of vendors initially, but also through their life cycles, and ensure strict adherence to the O-RAN Alliance specifications, possibly with a certification system like Chris mentioned. Looking only a little bit further out, we see a few areas that could be addressed as well, such as the support of innovation, RAPs, and the readiness for 6G. Applications or RAPs supported by Open RAN SMO solutions represent a really obvious opportunity to capitalize on US innovation. It's an area that lends itself well to specialized, highly skilled startups. So we think that NTI funding could be directed towards such solutions, possibly through virtualized environments that mimic complex network realities, something that's kind of needed in this particular area. Last but not least, with forecast by Deloro suggesting Open RAN will only account for about 20% of global RAN market share by 2030, it seems somewhat self-evident that O-RAN is a technology that starts in 5G, but could flourish in 6G. So as such, the time is right to start considering what the US needs will be in that time frame, in that area, and how could Open RAN solutions evolve to support those needs in the coming years. So that's all my comments. Thank you for listening, and I look forward to further engagement with the NTIA as the Innovation Fund implementation starts.
Great. Many thanks, Mike. We will move quickly over to Mavenir. We have John Baker. If you would please unmute and turn on your camera. And I'll note that after Mavenir, we'll have Microsoft and then VMware. And John, if you're on, would you please raise your hand? That'll help us unmute you as well. Perfect. I'll also note we have a number of pre-queued speakers. If you have recently raised your hand, we are adding you to the end of the queue. So over to you, John. Thank you.
Yeah, good morning, Jay Share, and thanks for the opportunity to speak today. My name is John Baker. I lead the Open RAN initiatives for Mavenir. Mavenir is a US headquartered company, and the US's only end-to-end cloud-native network software provider. We're a pioneer in Open RAN, have deployments in the UK, Germany, India, Thailand, and here in the US, we're the lead software supplier for Dish in the nation's first standalone 5G network using Open RAN. I'd like to start also by thanking NTIA for the leadership and the commitment to foster innovation and supply chain diversity through the advancement of open, interoperable, and standards-based networks, and for your efforts involving the Four Eyes countries in adoption of Open RAN principles. I'll focus my remarks on the key challenges that the Innovation Fund can help remedy. Firstly, with the global supply chain has hindered Open RAN advancements. Like many other industries, the wireless supply chain has been impacted by delays and corresponding price increases, particularly for the RAN market. Today's semiconductor supply chain means increased prices and delayed delivery for components needed for Open RAN. This disparity disadvantages small suppliers, including US headquartered companies who do not have supply chain resources and leverage, resulting in cost disadvantages of 20 to 50% for the same components and supply bias towards existing suppliers. The Innovation Fund can help remedy this disparity and boost smaller companies' competitiveness. Such an investment is also aligned with the intent of the CHIPS and Science Act, which includes strengthening US competitiveness on a world stage and advancing a more diverse wireless supply chain. Second, vendor lock continues to hinder Open RAN deployments at scale here in the US and globally for what is known as brownfield and overlay networks. The major challenge for adoption of deployment of open and interoperable systems here in the US is the lack of support from Tier 1 carriers, which is difficult to get while they are locked by dominant incumbent foreign headquartered suppliers that insist on closed solutions. Tier 1 adoption would also help alleviate the current volume-based pricing scheme that I spoke about earlier. The Innovation Fund can help use incentive Tier 1 carriers to advance deployment or at least large trials. For example, it could be used to encourage operators to have a certain percentage of their deployments with open and interoperable equipment. It could also help brownfield overlay networks to ensure that Open RAN networks can be overbuilt with existing networks. And, an example of this is an ally in the United Kingdom, where they essentially are having a 35% requirement of the country's network with Open RAN over the next decade. And third, lastly, the Innovation Fund can further standardization needs for more open and interoperable interfaces. The continuation of certain closed interfaces, including the X2, have held back the advancement of Open RAN and other technological advantages. These closed interfaces artificially maintain the incumbents' effective monopolies and have prevented new vendors from entering the market and have also blocked the existing dominant vendors from interoperating amongst themselves. The perpetuation of closed interfaces also impacts carrier aggregation, which has been uniquely specified by vendors, but needs to be addressed as an open interface. US funded specification groups such as Attendees need to ensure that standards are developed to both open and interoperable interfaces, and strong encouragement from US government is important to achieve the goal and investment for more US companies to participate in global standard settings bodies. And lastly, what constitutes Open RAN continues to drive confusion in the marketplace. Incumbent vendors continue to play word games and confuse the market and try to maintain the status quo of vendor lock. With respect to supply chain security, vendor lock networks have a single point of failure, which now, due to global geopolitics, put our global telecommunication networks at severe risk. Open RAN means open, interoperable, standards-based radio networks, It is not Open RAN if networks don't demonstrate interoperability. Such a network is still proprietary and closed except for the exclusive participants. To ensure the integrity of Open RAN and true interoperability, the Innovation Fund can help invest in certification labs to test products and adherence to standards and interoperability between many vendors. This type of investment would be a catalyst for a greater ecosystem and interoperate and innovate. And again, thanks for the opportunity to present Mavenir's views, and these be more deeply covered in our submission this week. Thank you very much.
Thank you for that intervention, John. We will now move to Microsoft, where we have Rob Blair on the line. Rob, if you wouldn't mind unmuting and turning on your camera. I think I did see your hand up.
Did I get it all? Can you hear me,
Perfect.
Jason?
Yes,
Great.
thank you. And I'll just
Not
note
at
that
all.
following Microsoft will have VMware. Over to you, Rob.
Thanks, Jaysha. So it's great to see you. It's great to see Alan and the rest of my friends on the line. First, I wanted to thank everybody for the opportunity to present Microsoft's views on this really incredible opportunity. It's really refreshing to hear such a wide diversity of views. So thank you for really reaching out to industry, and not just some of the normal players like us, but those who are bringing new innovation and new ideas to this really groundbreaking type of network. So given the format today, I'd like to focus most of my comments on two specific areas that we think that NTIA and the fund can have the greatest impact on, both the challenges and the opportunities facing open interoperable networks. First, technology diversity, and second, demand facilitation. So on technology, as NTIA is looking for opportunities for improving interoperability, which is something that I think most folks have talked about today, we encourage you to explore all the components of the ORAN stack needed for real-world, large and small-scale deployments. These components, of course, include the radio unit, the RAN software stack, hybrid cloud platforms, AI, ML, and enhanced Open RAN interfaces. These are all technologies and components that will have to play a decisive role in the success of Open RAN deployments. But I'd really like to focus on two of those technologies that really will be, at least from our perspective, pivotal for successful larger ORAN deployments: hybrid cloud platforms and AI ML. In particular, we think that hybrid cloud platforms are essential when deploying real-life virtual RAN, including Open RAN technology. A common example, and I'm going to try to pull back away from speaking cloud all the time and define myself a little bit. So a common example of hybrid cloud is the combination of a public cloud ecosystem with an on-premises environment through the use of a single management interface and a common software platform. Telecom providers benefit from hybrid cloud because this approach enables simpler management and lower cost while still being able to meet the strict performance and security requirements of a virtualized RAN. Within this construct, and here's one of those cloud terms again, edge computing capabilities are an important component of next-gen wireless networks. Edge computing refers to the movement of computational capability closer to where applications, users, and services actually operate. And moving computing closer to the user supports applications like RAN that are highly time sensitive and require very low latency. As NTIA thinks through projects to support, we'd recommend that hybrid cloud environments, as well as these other technologies, be fully incorporated into your solution set. Regarding artificial intelligence, we foresee, and I'm not going to talk about ChatGPT here, I'm just going to throw that out right now. We foresee the benefits of AI ML to be significant from several perspectives. First, AI will improve reliability. It can dramatically speed up and increase the efficiency of, say, returning lost coverage to subscribers by drawing from surrounding cells in an automated way, which will, of course, be useful in daily situations. And it's already been proven extremely useful during extreme situations like natural disasters. Similar benefits will be seen through AI-enabled dynamic spectrum sharing, channel modeling, prediction and propagation, and reducing service failures. We also predict that AI solutions for security optimization, threat detection, and fraud detection and prevention will bring great value to consumers. Similarly, AI-enabled resource allocation holds the potential to improve the sustainability of 5G and beyond G services, which will be increasingly important as users and IoT devices increase on the network. Given their nature, of course, AI solutions can be best delivered through the cloud to enable CSPs to automate network operations and service assurance, cut costs, increase agility, and boost subscriber experience. Integration of AI ML into ORAN deployments should be strongly encouraged for large-scale networks. For smaller providers, AI as a service will be a viable option that should be considered. And we would strongly encourage NTIA to consider pilots showcasing how AI from any innovator can be used for both large and small networks. The second category of opportunity for the fund is to support early work to incentivize demand for ORAN. Again, this is something that many of my colleagues have brought up today. NTIA might consider funding projects that will close technical gaps for the rapid deployment and adoption of this sort of a network. For instance, you could consider supporting programs in which private networks pilot ORAN. We think these networks can provide a more attainable and, let's say, speedy vehicle for addressing real use cases and create environments in which innovation can thrive in the near term. Additionally, NTIA could support information sharing nodes in which lessons learned in large-scale networks are made available to others to learn from. NTIA might also provide funding to create test beds and proofs of concepts, which could then incent innovation in the applications that will leverage 5G. Pilot programs should culminate in real-world use cases, not just theoretical ones, and commercially available 5G solutions. NTIA might also consider how to best incentivize Tier 1 operators to be involved in these proofs of concept, so potential at-scale, real-world gaps in solution can be developed. NTIA might also use its role within the federal system to support private network proofs of concept for the government in specific verticals such as agriculture, firefighting, forestry, or national defense. As I close, I'd like to note that our submission to the request for comment will include other suggestions, including on skilling programs to support the AI-enabled telecommunication network that we really see coming just around the corner. And I'd like to thank NTIA and many of my colleagues both for continuing to educate me on a lot of these issues, sharing these ideas, and really moving forward in a way that will speed ORAN and virtualized networks to the consumer here in the United States. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much for those remarks, Rob. We'll next move on to Miriam from VMware, and then we will move through as many folks who have raised their hand as we can get to in our allotted time, but we'll also note there will be other opportunities to engage later in the session. So please, over to you, Miriam.
Thank you, Jaysha. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay. Turn on my camera here. Thank you, NTIA, for the opportunity to provide comments today on this important topic. I'm Mariam Saran, Chief Technology Officer of the Service Provider and Edge Business Unit at VMware. We will be filing comments in response to NTIA's request, and we wanted to take this opportunity to start the conversation. First, a little bit about VMware. We are a leading provider of multi-cloud services, and we have pioneered virtualization, which provides organizations the much-needed flexibility and choice and the foundation to modernize their networks and deploy open architectures, including Open RAN. Headquartered in Palo Alto, California, VMware has a long history of innovating and modernizing the infrastructure that enables our digital economy. Specifically in telecommunications, we have partnered with operators and other stakeholders to accelerate the transformation to open architectures. Two specific points I wanted to make here. First, we support the goals of the Innovation Fund and believe that granting it in a targeted fashion will be foundational to accelerating the deployment of Open RAN. Second, we strongly support the Open RAN vision, which is around both open architectures and open ecosystems. These two should not be decoupled, and it is critical to understand the nuances here. This should be a foundation for all the specific topics you mentioned, Jaysha. In conclusion, I wanted to emphasize that the Open RAN vision is validated with several key recent advancements, including the ongoing deployment with DISH here in the United States, where we are a participating vendor. Thank you, everyone.
Great, thank you for those remarks. We will now move in to the folks who have raised their hand, starting with Aditya, and then to Rafi, and then to Mark. So please note that we are nearing the time limit of this session, so we would appreciate you limiting your remarks to 3 to 5 minutes, but we will have time for additional speakers during the next 2 agenda items. So please, over to you, Aditya.
Well, thank you so much for this opportunity to speak with this wonderful group. Today, I will try to keep my comments down to about 2 minutes. So one of the most important things that I feel as we move towards 6G, and this is a view shared by a lot of people in the industry, government, and academia as well, is that we need to think about what spectrum 6G is going to operate on. So most of the existing systems today operate in the sub-6 gigahertz bands, as you know. And of course, with 5G, there have been deployments in the 28 and 39 gigahertz bands. But the millimeter wave 5G deployments have been very challenging, primarily because the propagation of these frequencies is so challenging. Therefore, there is a growing interest within the community to go slightly lower down the frequency bands and operate within subsets of the 6 to 24 gigahertz bands, where the propagation is much better, but still you have more spectrum available as compared to the sub 6 gigahertz bands. But the propagation is definitely better than the millimeter wave bands. So this spectrum is obviously very exciting, but the big challenge is that there are a lot of incumbent users of this spectrum, whether they are DoD use cases or satellites or other classified government users of this spectrum. There are incumbents, and so if cellular systems have to operate at these frequencies, we have to learn how to share the spectrum. We have to learn how to coexist, and these are hard problems, and these problems require experimentation to be done. And one of the biggest problems with this is that, as far as we know, there are very few experimental platforms or software-defined radios available to perform experimentation in these bands. So essentially, based on these conversations we've had with various people in the ecosystem, our company, Pi Radio, which is a startup company funded by the National Science Foundation as well as DARPA, has started working on software-defined radios that operate in these 6 to 24 gigahertz bands. And so essentially, we are designing the system to operate with the Xilinx RF SoC as the baseband system. So any software that runs on the RF SoC can run on our software-defined radio as well. It operates from 6 to 24 gigahertz. It has an 8-channel fully digital beamformer. And I'll just end by saying that we are looking for partners on the baseband on the O-RAN side, because what we bring to the table is how to build the software-defined radios as well as the RF front ends. I think this sort of experimentation is very important, and it'll be so much fun to work on. So we are hoping that the NTIA funds work in this space, and we are also looking for partners to work on this. Well, thank you for the opportunity to speak with you folks today. Thank you.
Great, thank you for that presentation. We will now move to Rafi Zarukian and then Mark Pierpoint. Rafi, could you please unmute and turn your camera on?
All right. Hi, all. My name is Rafi Zurikian. I'm from Signal System Management. We were a winner of the Stage 2 award at the NTIA 5G Challenge, hosted by Cable Labs, so some familiar faces here. So we have a cloud-based software solution. We're building an entire end-to-end software stack, starting with the CU. And maybe because we're cloud native, maybe because we're a small business, but my perspective is that O-RAN is closer than some of our previous speakers believe. I think the most important thing we need from this fund is one independent testing lab and to certify. And let me not mince words. I mean certify 5G and future G components, not some notion of pre-certification. I mean, as John Baker mentioned, there's some word games that have been thrown around today. I think one of them is this notion of pre-certification. The other is, and I'll get to this a little bit, but maybe the notion of openness, right? So we need certainly an independent testing lab. The other is we need government funding, targeted government funding, as the previous panelist, I think Miriam mentioned. We need targeted funding. And of course, I would like to see it targeted at small businesses, but small businesses in particular that are US-based, focus on openness, and perhaps we can include some of our European partners, right? I think there's a lot of good work happening with Open Air Interface, with Osmocom and SRS-RAN. So independent certification labs, targeted funding towards small businesses with commitment to O-RAN. And in a perfect world, I would like to see open solutions, not just open standards, which O-RAN is a good start, and obviously 3GP is a good start as well. I mean, anyone could read that, that's publicly open. But open solutions, I think, are more important. And open solutions because, one, they serve as a reference implementation. So we talked about interoperability before, but if you pair an independent certification lab with a reference implementation that that becomes very powerful, right? Because any vendor can come in, pop out a component, and pop theirs in, and no gatekeepers can say, "Hey, it doesn't work," right? Especially if your certification lab does have the requirements that an operator would need, scale, security, and interoperability, right? And the focus on tier 1 operators is necessary, right? Or actually including tier 1 operators is necessary. But perhaps there could be innovation. More innovation can be had with smaller operators, right? Virtual mobile network operators, right? Perhaps those types of operators are a little bit more willing to innovate. So just to summarize here, I'm making the direct ask from the fund to 1, support small businesses on the vendor side, and 2, support virtual mobile network operators and MNOs that have a real commitment to O-RAN, and that have a commitment to O-RAN where they're willing to deploy them at scale and engage in a certification lab, right? So that's my third point. Establish an independent testing and certification lab for components and systems. And then 4, directly support U.S. person involvement in open source implementations and directly support U.S. person involvement in O-RAN and 3GP and other TIP and other bodies like that. So a lot of asks, but I'm a small business who is actually pursuing a full end-to-end solution, software only, based in the U.S. and happy to partner with our European partners as well because they have shown a commitment to open source through the Open Air Alliance. So thank you for the comments, or thank you for the time.
Thank you for that intervention. We will now move to Mark Pierpoint, and hopefully we'll have time for Andrew Thiessen as well. So over to you, Mark. Please unmute and turn on your camera. Oh.
You're still muted, Mark.
Okay, let me try that. Does that work? Yeah, seemingly. Yes. Good morning, everybody. My name is Mark Pierpoint. I'm a Senior Vice President with Keysight Technologies, responsible for strategic innovation and partnerships. We are the leading provider of test and measurement solutions globally, and specifically support a lot of activities across 5G, and have been tracking and helping work across the O-RAN community for several years from its initial instantiations in opening up some of the front haul to where we are today. I wanted to thank everybody because I think it's so far we've collected a lot of the inputs, but I wanted to focus in a couple of areas, which is that Open RAN, as we've discussed, really talks to this open nature, as we just heard from Rafi, but requires a lot of different interfaces across several different components. And as a result of that, one of the critical areas that we've not really dug into yet today, but I wanted to make sure it was clearly on the agenda, was really around this whole challenge of testing and conformance to standards and interoperability. If we want to be able to enable multiple different vendors to provide different pieces of this system, there are several key requirements. So interoperability is being one of those, not just in terms of testing towards the standards that are defined, but also to then check that interoperability between different vendors and then test that for improved performance, scalability, and security, but also energy efficiency that is continuing to cause challenges around the globe for operating these networks. Today, O-RAN has a number of different plugfests. They operate on a semi-annual basis. We've hosted some ourselves. And indeed, if we want to accelerate the adoption of Open RAN, I think we need to move to a situation where it isn't just every 6 months, but there's a continuous opportunity to be able to, for vendors to be able to test their solutions, test their products against other members or other providers, and to do that on a continuous basis. Today, we have one OTIC in the US, and I think we need more geographically to do that. I see NTIA being able to support that. And as there have been several comments already, and I think very appropriately from smaller businesses, being able to overcome some of the price challenges of doing that testing could be done through multiple geographically dispersed across the US interoperability testing. There were some good comments about private networks, specifically, for example, the DoD's usage of this is going to bring probably in incremental requirements to some of these specifications. And so again, similar problems that we're talking about from a commercial standpoint exist within the special case of DoD. And I think we need to discuss how that also fits within this network. One final point is that we've heard from a number of operators, and I think it's pretty clear over the last several decades, those operators have essentially reduced their ability to do system integration across one of these types of networks. And so I think the other area that you'll hear from us about is some ideas as to how we might be able to stimulate an ecosystem of system integration companies that can support the kind of scale that we heard about from as being required from Chris Boyer and AT&T and others. So at that, I'll leave the other comments for our written response, but thank you for organizing this and very excited to participate.
Great, thank you for your comments, Mark. Last but not least, for this agenda item, we have Andrew Thiessen, and then I will be turning it over to my colleague, Sarah Skaluba, who will lead the next session. If you still have your hand up, you're able to participate in any of the other agenda items. So please, Andrew, over to you.
Thank you, Jaysha, and to the NTIA team. Super excited about this fund, right? Really excited to see it getting kicked off. And so rather than belabor points that were already made prior, I guess I would add 2 additional points of specific focus that I think would be good for really seeing the O-RAN industry take off. One is, and John mentioned it briefly, right? He talked about the X2, and so I think from a 5G perspective, focusing on the XN interface, right? It's not just about interoperability between the RU, DU, and CU. It's also about making sure that O-RAN-based GNOD Bs with different build and materials from different manufacturers are able to interoperate with each other at the GNOD B level, so that you can actually try to move, quickly past, what for many operators will be a brownfield integration problem across the United States. So I think specific focus on the XN interface, while not being, an O-RAN defined interface, right? It is defined by 3GPP. I think, not excluding, right, the innovation and the focus, right, to not look at interfaces like that would make things more challenging. And then from an innovation perspective, right, I mean, people talk a lot about the OAM savings when it comes to O-RAN, but when it comes to innovation, we look at the radio intelligent controller as being a particular area of focus, the ability to write XApps and RApps to in real time and real time, control the radio system. We think that's probably where we might see new enterprise verticals actually generate new revenue out of 5G, which we're not really seeing today with the MBB focused networks. And so, driving innovation through the RIC, we think is another particular area of focus. So thank you, Jaysha. I appreciate it. I know we're over time, and so have a good rest of your day.
Great, thanks, Andy. So our next topic is focused on addressing Innovation Fund goals, and we welcome your views on the kinds of concrete projects that will best advance the key objectives of the fund as described in the FY 2021 National Defense Authorization Act. We particularly welcome thoughts on the usefulness of test beds, trials, use cases, feasibility studies, plugfest certification programs, and pilots, among others. Like our last session, we will have folks pre-queued who will kick things off before opening up the floor. And as a reminder for folks who might have dialed in late, today's session is recorded and will be posted online. Additionally, we kindly ask that everybody limits their remarks to 5 minutes. If you would like to join the queue, please raise your hand and we will add you to the list. Additionally, if you're calling in by phone, please press *5 to join the queue, and then you will have to press *6 to unmute. Additionally, if you're having technical difficulties or have a question for the program team, please email innovationfund@ntia.gov. So with that, we will kick it off with ITI. So turning to Katie McAuliffe, and then we will turn to the National Spectrum Consortium. Thanks, everyone.
Katie, could you raise your hand and we'll get you unmuted?
Thank you. And while we are getting Katie set up, if we could have the National Spectrum Consortium, Joe, please raise your hand, and then NEC will follow you, followed by ORPC. Thank you.
Hey there, can you hear me now?
Yep, thank you.
Okay, great. Sorry about that. So hi, Katie McAuliffe. I'm with ITI, and we are a global advocate for technology that represents many of the world's most innovative companies. And our diverse membership includes companies that operate in almost every layer of the 5G stack, including semiconductor, network equipment designers, manufacturers, software, digital services companies, and those that'll harness 5G and NextG to evolve their businesses. So just wanted to throw in a few comments about a focus on pilots, commercial deployments, real world end-to-end testing, and then also some more generally available public testing environments. So our comments are going to suggest several options, and those do include expanding on existing projects, funding a new public lab, in addition to dispersing awards to pilot projects, commercial trials, app development, and end-to-end environments. We think funds should be focused on projects that will mature the technology and scale it to meet the challenges for network operators and broader commercial deployment on a competitive timeline. So private networks will need to contend with the same kind of challenges as large-scale commercial networks, such as a single point of responsibility, which adds to the accountability, oversight, cost, and management burden for those operators. But at a much lower scale than those broad commercial deployments, private networks may allow early opportunities for Open RAN success, so to demonstrate that success. In this way, NTI can support the creation of an interoperability blueprint and testing facilities accessible by all vendors, regardless of size and revenue. NTIA's support for end-to-end interoperability testing environments could complement ongoing private sector efforts by helping vendors create deployment and maintenance tools and explore vertical use cases. The Innovation Fund could support debugging events or plugfests where different vendors can bring their software, verify, and fine-tune interoperability with other components. And we've heard a lot of requests for those sorts of environments. In the public sector, it may make sense for NTI to support a new lab or expand on existing innovation zones. For example, funding a federated lab system facilitated by a neutral third-party coordinator could help leverage existing facilities in a way that makes them more accessible to participants. These types of environments can support the ecosystem development and research, particularly in performance advancements for what 6G will entail. Long-term life cycles can make the telecom industry particularly challenging for maintaining presence in the long term. So these neutral research environments can be repurposed for some of the innovation, as some of the innovation zones have been previously, and can support industry through life cycle dips into the next stage of innovation, as we are looking to supporting 5G into 6G going forward. Additionally, further end-to-end pilots or testing on security will lead to more reliable infrastructure at the outset. For example, having additional security test beds that examine security scenarios identified through bodies such as CISRC at the FCC or findings from the Enduring Security Framework allow industry to work on and test recommendations or identify other threat scenarios once items that need to be addressed have been identified. Standards can be developed and brought back to industry-led standards bodies. And these testing labs can be designed for penetration tests on the products that include bug bounty program for issues found. From lessons learned, private and or public testing labs can set up a way for ORAN vendors and suppliers to share threat intelligence before and after deployments. I think a lot of these things have kind of been summarized by other comments that we've already heard. So just to add on to that, you'll see more detail in our comments. I do have some items on grant criteria, but I could hold for the next session if you'd like.
That would be great. Thank you so much, Katie.
Thanks.
Great. So with that, we will now turn to the National Spectrum Consortium. So this is Joe, and following the NSC, we will have NEC and then ORPC. Thank you.
Good morning. Can you hear me?
Yep, thank you.
Great. Thanks, Sarah, and thank you, Jaysha and team. This is a great opportunity. Really appreciate it. As mentioned, I'm Joe Cochin. I'm the Executive Director of the National Spectrum Consortium. I want to thank NTIA and everyone for being here this morning. For those who don't know, the NSC is a member-driven organization of more than 400 innovative companies and academic research groups across the country. We're one of the largest pools of scientists and engineers who understand spectrum and wireless communications and work on executing research and prototype projects. To date, we've used an OTA contract to execute over 120 projects worth about $1.2 billion to deliver innovative solutions to complex wireless technology problems. Earlier last year, at the request of one of our stakeholders, we pulled together an Open RAN advisory group that has been working on providing recommendations to the federal government, specifically DoD and now NTIA through the process of the RFC this week, to make suggestions about how to advance the Open RAN ecosystem here in the United States. We had, over 200 participants representing 100 organizations who produced 80 or more white papers on that effort. So it's been a wide-scale effort, and I wanted to just summarize quickly some of the recommendations which go toward how NTIA can maximize the goals of this fund. We think I would summarize there are three main opportunities here that we think could be huge accelerators to the Open RAN ecosystem in the United States. The first is that NTIA could work on creating an at-scale multi-vendor Open RAN test and development platform, ideally dispersed at multiple locations across the United States, accessible to a broad user base, including both commercial and academic users, large companies, as well as small challengers and startups, and specifically entities requiring support and assistance, subsidy or otherwise, where some of that integration and interoperability testing is too expensive for their organizations to complete. Those facilities should be predictably available, supported by a full-time operations staff for project test and setup, inclusive of technical support to help onboard users in their experiments, persistently available, in other words, not just one-time PlugFest or other organizations, able to provide subsidy, as mentioned, for those who can't afford that kind of testing on their own, able to provide access to licensed or shared spectrum that either federal or commercial users could contribute to the effort, such that you could do tests not just indoors but outdoors and at scale. And then inclusive of a mechanism to report some basic findings from this research more broadly. I think one of the big lessons that we found is that, in order to encourage folks to have confidence in the openness and the interoperability of this environment, you've got to be able to talk publicly about ways in which different solutions and different components in the network are interoperating. It can't be just private testing for private commercial use only. In addition, we would recommend, a rapid pace R&D fund to quickly create demonstration and prototype deployments that showcase the various use cases for Open RAN networks. And then finally, an open source reference software architecture is something that NTIA could fund here, such that researchers and innovators don't necessarily have to acquire proprietary or even semi-proprietary software stacks in order to start their innovation, but have a baseline from which they can work to innovate. The NSC and its membership, we believe, are well positioned to help with this effort. As mentioned, we've done a ton of prototyping R&D projects, competitively sourced among our 400 members who compete for the opportunity to produce research and development prototypes. We look forward to working with all of our members, with NTIA and others on this effort, and we'll be submitting comments that include these and other suggestions this week to the RFC. Thanks very much for the opportunity.
Great, thanks, Joe. We will now turn it over to Rahul at NEC Advanced Networks with the Open RAN Policy Coalition, and then the Platforms for Advanced Wireless Research Office on deck.
Hi, good morning. Thank you very much for inviting us to provide comments. My name is Rahul Chandra. I'm with NEC Advanced Networks, which is a wholly owned subsidiary of NEC Corporation. the comments I want to make are driven from our place in the industry, which is essentially as an end-to-end Open RAN solutions provider. So we're in a unique position where we provide many of the infrastructure products for Open RAN, as well as a strong systems integration capability. And we've been involved in several of the deployments of Open RAN-based networks around the world, in Japan and Europe, et cetera. So we've had some commercial deployment experience, and that's what's driving some of the comments that I'm going to make about today. I think a lot of the speakers earlier talked about various components and the need for testing. I think one of the topics that has not been addressed yet is if we think about the Open RAN stack end to end, the base foundation layer is predicated on having a very strong supply of Open RAN radios that are interoperating with the CUDU and are integrated with them, right? And if we think about the radio supply, that is essentially an end-by-end problem, which means that if you think about the various configurations of radios that are required in any network, it can range from a 44R product to all the way up to a massive MIMO 32TR, 64TR product. And that's on one axis. The other axis is the number of different spectrum bands. So very quickly, we can understand that this becomes a very significant and end-by-end problem. And without having an adequate supply of these Open RAN compliant radios that could be integrated with CUDU products, it's very difficult to accelerate adoption of Open RAN in the US and globally, right? So I think one of the key things that we wanted to highlight is the fact that it's imperative that NTIA consider funding for accelerating the supply of Open RAN compliant radios in the short term, because that is going to help accelerate Open RAN adoption in the US and globally. And this also mirrors the overall network spend, if you think about. So almost 70% of the network CapEx goes to RAN infrastructure, predominantly on the radio side, and then on the baseband now CUDU side. So it sort of mirrors some of the investments that carriers have made in the past. So that's area number one. And if we think about what has happened over the last 20 years, given the concentrated nature of the RAN industry, it has somewhat sort of stifled innovation. So again, we're open to working with other players in the market, chipset vendors, et cetera, to accelerate innovation in this part of their Open RAN infrastructure. So that's point number one. Point number two is the layers that sit on top of this base connectivity layer, if you will, is the intelligent automation layer. And that includes the RIC, the XApps, as well as the orchestration and SMO layer. And those are critical layers to be built to not only differentiate Open RAN from legacy networks, but also provide the performance and programmability that carriers expect from us as vendors. So that is the second layer that we think needs to be adequately funded or should be funded as part of the NTIA program. And then the third aspect is, and I think a lot of speakers have talked about this before, is the systems integration aspect. And again, we've been involved in a number of projects around the world, and it's a non-trivial problem. And so, there's a lot of work that industry associations like TIP, et cetera, are doing in creating frameworks. I think certification of various permutations of radios and CUDU, for example, are important. So certainly there's a lot of work that still needs to be done in terms of system integration, and we appreciate NTIA's support in those initiatives. So with that, I will close. Thank you very much again for the opportunity, and we'll provide further comments in our response.
Great. Thank you so much. We will now turn to Diane Ronaldo with the Open RAN Policy Coalition to provide some remarks.
Hi, Diane. Can you raise your hand really quick? We'll get you a presenter. Thank you.
Thanks all.
There we go. Takes me a little bit longer than everyone else. Hi, everyone. I really appreciate you doing this. And I am happy to say on behalf of the 58 Open RAN Policy Coalition members, I'm thrilled to be having this discussion today. It is the culmination of 3 years of advocacy from the coalition. I'm proud to work with my members and all the work that they've done, from the virtual fly-ins to the in-person meetings to the many global education seminars. We have taken a concept that was barely known outside of telecommunications circles and have turned it into an innovative solution that's being deployed today and will have positive ramifications for beyond. ORPC shares the goals of expanding access to broadband and fostering innovation, because that's truly why we're here doing this. These goals are at the heart of our mission at the Open RAN Policy Coalition. Communication network operators and suppliers form the ORPC to support policies and initiatives that will advance the adoption of open and interoperable solutions in the wireless radio access network to promote innovation, spur competition, and expand the supply chain for advanced wireless communication technologies. Coalition members represent a cross-section of the wireless communication industry, ranging from network operators to solution providers to system integrators, cloud providers, edge device manufacturers, test laboratories, cell tower owners, leaders in AI, and countless others. For years, ORPC and its members have assiduously advocated for the enactment of this $1.5 billion fund to bring a national focus to what is ultimately a global imperative. Standardizing and driving market-led development and adoption of open and interoperable network interfaces to invite more competition and into the broadband marketplace, expand access to broadband, and provide a foundation for rapid innovation and deployment going forward and without delay. With targeted funding in the intermediate term, the Wireless Innovation Fund can promote a virtuous and continuous cycle of innovation, design, testing, in both pilot developments and proof of concept commercial deployments. NTIA should seek opportunities to help stakeholders invest in ecosystem developments that provide a market-based framework to deploy commercial Open RAN networks and at scale and as soon as feasibly possible. This would promote ongoing innovation of commercial deployments iteratively over time as the ecosystem develops the cost-effective replacement to traditional Open RAN. And one thing that we've advocated from day one of founding our organization is that we do not need mandates, that by working hand in hand with public and private sector through our international collaboration, we can help bring Open RAN to scale. NTIA should look to support technology development into specific areas that drive Open RAN performance and competitiveness today, but will also lead towards technology, intellectual property, and standards leadership and development in the US for 5G advanced and next generation networks. ORPC would caution against the creation of significant bureaucratic red tape that would slow deployment, innovation, and new high-skilled jobs. Again, it is crucial to accelerate Open RAN advances so that this funding is dispersed as soon as possible. Based on members' industry experiences, our comments will make certain observations about the state of Open RAN deployment and recommend potential ways in which the fund could, through targeted and strategic grants, help drive and accelerate the commercial deployment of Open RAN at scale in the United States and other key markets, so that will be a competitive option immediately in 5G deployments, which will have benefits for the longer term for the future of 6G next generation. NTIA should expedite funds investments in order to affect 5G deployments in the near future and to get ahead of our next generation developments. And again, just in closing, thank you for holding this today. And we really appreciate the opportunity to submit comments Friday, and excited to hear feedback on what the organization has to say about it. Thanks, Sarah.
Great, thank you. We will now turn it over to Dr. Tommaso Melodia, Research Director for the Platforms for Advanced Wireless Research Project Office. Thank you.
Can you hear me?
Yep, thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you, Sarah, and thank you, NTIA, for the opportunity to provide comments today. I'm Professor of Electrical Computer Engineering at Northeastern University, and I'm also Director of Research for the Platforms for Advanced Wireless Research, or POWER Project Office, an entity composed of US Ignite and Northeastern University that has been working on sending 4 open and programmable wireless networking testbeds in the US, Powder, Cosmos, AirPow, and ERA, in addition to Colosseum, the world's largest simulator of wireless systems. The POWER program was created with $50 million in funding from the National Science Foundation and matching contributions in kind and in-kind donations from an industry consortium of leading companies and wireless associations. The POWER platforms have been tackling difficult system and networking challenges for the past 5 years, with the program specifically designed to provide shared open network infrastructure and end-to-end programmability by design as a way of driving wireless research and innovation. Multiple POWER platforms have partnered with the ORAN Alliance to test new Open RAN technologies as part of PlugFest and proof of concept demonstrations, and they're primed to support the specific testing and research efforts required to accelerate Open RAN development and commercial adoption. Colosseum is also a national research facility to experiment at scale at the intersection of artificial intelligence, machine learning, and Open RAN. We see two major categories of Open RAN R&D efforts needed by the wireless community. The first is interoperability and performance parity testing, which will provide the assurances required by operators to deploy Open RAN technologies commercially. And the POWER platforms can support this today through end-to-end network testing and as part of new badging and certification programs. The second is advanced Open RAN research and development to accelerate innovation and significantly expand the telecom supplier ecosystem. Here too, the POWER platforms have been developed by design as end-to-end programmable network infrastructures with both indoors and outdoors and across urban, suburban, and rural environments. And there is significant computing and software resources required to collect data and experiment with inference and control with machine learning and in Open RAN networks. It's also important to note that one of the major concerns for Open RAN R&D, cited in the recent study by the National Spectrum Consortium that Joe mentioned earlier, is that most testing facilities today are not accessible to non-traditional telecom technology providers, and thus to new innovators who can help diversify our telecom supply chain. The POWER platforms are open to all researchers and have mechanisms in place to onboard and support users across the startup, academic, government, and enterprise landscape. As the NTIA considers how to use the Wireless Innovation Fund to support the promotion of and deployment of open, interoperable, and standards-based radio access networks, the POWER Project Office recommends funding the following. One, an at-scale multi-vendor Open RAN test and development platform, leveraging existing investments made through the POWER program, but with additional funding to support equipment and personnel needs that allows US innovators to demonstrate Open RAN viability through badging and certification, to prove system integration capabilities and develop new features and functions within an Open RAN architecture. Two, a neutral governing body in charge of working with industry and academic researchers to formulate research, testing, and data collection challenges that are then funded and executed through the test and development platform. And three, a grant program to subsidize usage of the test and development platform for smaller organizations, non-traditional vendors, and academic innovators that might otherwise not have the resources to participate in the necessary R&D. And at least a portion should specifically be focused on advancing use cases based on machine learning, enabling control, service orchestration, and automation through RAN intelligent controllers and on open source software. We believe that these recommended initiatives are critical for promoting Open RAN development and deployment, and that leveraging the existing POWER platforms to support these efforts will accelerate the process. The POWER platforms offer end-to-end Open RAN testing, are open and accessible to a wide user base, and have practical experience enabling research with programmable wireless networks that is unmatched across the US R&D landscape. Thank you all. That's all I had.
Great. Thank you so much for that thoughtful feedback. We will now open it up to the floor for any additional remarks or thoughts on this topic. Again, we're discussing how best to address Innovation Fund objectives through concrete projects or initiatives. And as a reminder, if you would like to speak to this topic, please raise your hand using the Teams platform or dial *5. Katie at ITI, did you want to speak to this session as well? Great. We will get you off mute. Thank you. 1 second as we work to get you off mute. Oh. Great.
Okay, are we good?
Yep.
Okay, thanks again for the opportunity to comment in this section as well. I just wanted to throw a few brief things out there on grant criteria that ITI's members were interested in. So to kind of start off with, we think NTIA should include foundational cybersecurity criteria. That would be adhering to cyber standards and best practices as a prerequisite for funding. We think the criteria related to receiving grants from the Innovation Fund should incorporate security. We encourage adherence to consensus-based international cybersecurity standards and best practices to be included as a foundational requirement to receive grant funding. While companies are already taking steps to improve the security of open and interoperable standards-based deployments, such an approach will further incentivize good cyber practices. It's foundational to enabling organizations to take a zero trust approach to their multi-vendor networks, including applying security on the network slice level. The projects and initiatives funded through the program should recognize these principles as foundational security elements to build open and mature use cases around. We would also, we've kind of discussed this a little bit, what would encourage NTIA to further explain what it means by security reporting, whether NTIA is talking about incident notification or talking about benchmarks or reporting risk analysis scorecards. And we kind of have some more details about that in our comments to be submitted. And then very quickly, we are happy to hear that you will be putting out your first NOFO in the spring, because we think you should disperse awards quickly to support new projects and startups to make sure that we have that diverse market that we're looking for. There should be a per award cap and not limit awards only to companies headquartered in the US. NTIA, as a part of a broader US policy, should expressly advance a diverse, trusted market of suppliers based in the United States, as well as in allied and other partner market democracies. Only a multinational, diverse vendor base of trusted suppliers will have the capacity to serve the US and our partner country markets. So those were just some brief comments that we had on grant criteria. I hope that's helpful.
Thank you, Katie. That is a great segue to our last session on defining program criteria that my colleague Phil Murphy will be introducing. So I will now kick it over to Phil, our Senior Advisor in the Office of the Assistant Secretary. Thank you.
Thanks, Sarah. So our last session is going to explore the kinds of grant criteria that NTI should consider to best achieve the goals of the Innovation Fund. NTI welcomes views on this topic, particularly as it relates to standards, security, teaming, and place of performance. As a reminder, today's session is recorded. We kindly ask folks to limit any remarks to 5 minutes, as with other sessions. If you'd like to join the queue, please raise your hand and we'll add you to the list. If you're dialing in by phone, as a reminder, you need to press *5 to raise your hand and then *6 to unmute once called upon. You can also email us at innovationfund@nti.gov if you're having difficulty joining the queue or otherwise need to connect with the program staff. So with that, we're going to kick things off, and we have a few folks pre-queued. So we have Chaitali Segupta with Sirius 360 first, and then Tom McGarry with TIA. So Chaitali, are you on the line?
Thank you. Can you see me?
Yes.
Okay. I do have some slides I'm going to bring up. Hope you can see that. Okay. All right. Well, thank you, NTIA, for this opportunity to speak. My name is Chaitali Sengupta, founder and CEO at Sirius 360. I'm here with my co-founder, Alan Gatherer at Sirius 360. We are a team of RAN experts with experience spanning silicon, OEMs, and operators. Sirius 360 brings a novel approach to the construction and deployment of the 5G RAN components, especially the DU, using a RAN domain-specific language and cloud-based automation. We focus on the most challenging part of the RAN, the PHY or layer 1. I have 3 points to make on how the Innovation Fund programs can be designed to help overcome barriers to the adoption of Open RAN. First, by creating market pull. And market pull from a diversity of use cases in multiple market segments. Open RAN should directly lead to business advantages to end users in all our target market segments. So now, how can the Innovation Fund help facilitate this? First, by promoting standards and technology that enable system composition, including the lowest levels of the stack, the PHY and the MAC, instead of treating those as black boxes. Reference stacks, we believe, are not enough. What we will need are tools and technologies that adapt that stack to deployment and use case specific goals with agility without requiring tens and hundreds of engineers in every iteration and every case as we see today. Second, programs that require teaming between Open RAN technology providers and end users in multiple business segments, whether it's Industry 4.0, agriculture, transportation, defense, and others. So we have that product market fit as an industry between Open RAN technologies and what each market needs. Second, my second point, incorporating innovation from large and small companies, we believe is key to the success of Open RAN. And we wanted to share our perspective being a small company in this field. And it's a field that has traditionally not been conducive to startups, as every VC will tell you. They've been telling us that. Startups are constantly chasing integration and partnerships with bigger players to even enter the market and start making revenue. And that works only in rare conditions. Whereas US innovation is at its most potent when the market enables large and small companies to cooperate. As we actually see, we have a great reference, which is what's happening in the machine learning field. And to do this, what we need is an open framework that facilitate integration of contributions from small innovators in specific areas, software, tools, algorithms, along with larger players and academia. And which leads me to my last point, system integration. System integration is the biggest challenge in Open RAN, and this has come up as a theme in from previous speakers. And that's what we believe is preventing Open RAN from being competitive. And like, for example, the #1 challenge we hear today is RU and DU integration, even when the RU and DU coming from multiple vendors, even when both comply to the ORAN interface, ORAN standards. So clearly, interface definition that the ORAN Alliance is doing such a great job on is not sufficient for seamless integration. And also, we are learning that testing is not the answer to achieving interoperability. Testing is there to test whether the interoperability is working fine, but you cannot really depend on it just for the integration. So to overcome this from a technology point of view, what the Innovation Fund should promote and fund are standardization and open source activities that go beyond interfaces and interoperability testing. We need an intellectual property protected open box framework all the way down again to layers 1 and 2, which are the hardest parts of the RAN. And this concept of a framework supported by abstraction and automation is actually not new. It's been successfully used in the machine learning field to integrate all kinds of innovations in silicon, in software, in algorithms. So we're not saying that we need a machine learning framework for RAN. I'm sure there are other folks that are focusing on it. What we're really saying is let's follow the methodology that's been used in the machine learning field with frameworks like TensorFlow and PyTorch and apply that methodology to RAN. And once we do that, we can have many advantages. We can have true multi-vendor hardware software abstraction, integration of RU and DU without like costing hundreds of engineers and maximizing portability of software and algorithms. Someone might have just a new FEC algorithm or a massive MIMO algorithm or a way of optimizing to reduce total cost of ownership. So to recap, this is our feedback for the design of the Innovation Fund program. #1, create market pull from diversity of market segments and use cases. #2, promote open frameworks to solve Open RAN system integration challenges. And this is going beyond open interfaces and interoperability testing. And #3, again, on the point of open frameworks, let's follow the methodologies that have been so successful in the machine learning field and actually even in the software-defined networking field. And we use open frameworks to accelerate time to market for innovations from large and small companies. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for those comments. So next up, we've got Tom McGarry from TIA. Tom, do you want to raise your hand and unmute? Tommy there? Oh, great.
Yep. Yes, thank you, Phil. Hi, my name is Tom McGarry. I'm Vice President of Standards at the Telecommunications Industry Association, TIA, the Trusted Industry Association for the Connected World. Thank you for allowing me to speak at the Public Wireless Supply Chain Innovation Fund listening session. TIA is a US-based standards development organization, an SDO, representing global manufacturers, suppliers, and service providers in the information and communications technology industry. TIA is credited by the American National Standards Institute, and over 90 years, our members have developed thousands of standards that enable competitive networks around the world, including conformity assessment standards that address the security of supply chains. TIA is a technology agnostic association that focuses on helping the ICT industry develop innovative, secure, and effective networks. My primary message regarding the Innovation Fund is that as funds are used to support the promotion and deployment of open, interoperable, and standards-based radio access networks, much consideration should be given to ensure that cyber and supply chain security is built into these open and interoperable networks through standards that apply across technologies and support the open and interoperable networks described in the funds. And that standards-related activities associated with deploying radio access networks should be eligible to apply for funding. Funding standards-related activity would be especially helpful in removing barriers for participation by small and medium-sized organizations and fostering the next generation of standards professionals. While the RFC references some SDOs working primarily on RAN standards, I want to note that there's a wide variety of standards required to effectively deploy open, interoperable, standards-based RAN. For example, standards related to antenna towers and data centers are, of course, used when promoting and deploying these networks. Conformity assessment standards are also used to ensure the STAN is deployed in a high-quality, secure, and trusted manner. These standards may not specifically mention RAN, but are most certainly used. Applications for standards-related funding would primarily apply to two types of entities: SDOs and private sector organizations that participate in standards-related activity at SDOs. Examples of expenses that could be covered in this fund include staffing that contributes to standards development, holding standards committee meetings, membership fees, certifying processes and deployments, purchasing standards, among other activities. I also want to discuss how this fund can promote American competitiveness in a global ICT market. To the extent that money from the fund is spent on deploying network infrastructure, those funds should go towards the construction of networks in the United States. This supports U.S. workers and American economic prosperity. At the same time, however, funds should go toward using the best technologies, regardless of where the firms that develop those technologies are headquartered. Companies and organizations outside of the U.S. play a vital role in the open RAN technology ecosystem. Many employ hundreds or thousands of American workers, and they should be included as eligible recipients so long as they have a U.S. nexus. There's one caveat. Untrusted vendors, in particular those on the FCC's covered entity list, should not be eligible to apply for funding. More broadly, the department should take care to ensure that participating entities are not headquartered in jurisdictions without rule of law protections and respect for democratic values. Additionally, the realities of the global ICT supply chain mean that requirements to use American-made products should not be applied to this program. This is for two reasons. A requirement to use American-made network components would make deployment and testing impossible. Put simply, there is no meaningful supply of radio units and other components that meet prevailing domestic sourcing standards with which to test and deploy RAN technologies. Buy America or Buy American requirements are not relevant to the CHIPS and Science Act, which authorized this program. This is an R&D grant program, not an infrastructure program, and relevant purchases by the U.S. government should be covered by the commercial IP exemption or waivers. In conclusion, with the fund, NTIA has recognized the role that open, interoperable, and standard-based radio access networks will play in supporting U.S. leadership in telecommunications ecosystems, fostering competition, lowering costs for consumers and network operators, and strengthening and securing the supply chain. The Innovation Fund is an excellent opportunity to encourage private sector support for standards-related activity and meet the NTIA's goals as noted in the RFC to support network operators in procuring trusted, secure RAN and unlock opportunities for U.S. companies, particularly small and medium enterprises, to compete in a market historically dominated by a few foreign suppliers. Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much for those comments. So I think in the queue, we have Chris Boyer on behalf of AT&T, who has his hand raised. Chris, just to check in, are you also speaking on behalf of Tracy? I think we've seen that her hand's raised too. Chris or Tracy, or either of you there?
I was not necessarily. I just had a particular point I wanted to make based on some of the conversation. I have not spoken with Tracy, so maybe calling her independently if that's okay.
Sure, and just could you remind folks, obviously, who you're with and the organization, just sure. If folks are joining since you spoke before.
Sure, yeah. So Chris Boyer, I'm with AT&T. I just had a really quick point. I think there's been a lot of great ideas talked about this morning about some of the things that should be included in a NOFO. I just wanted to mention that I think it's really important that as NTIA considers the NOFO requirements that they're not overly strict or they set too high of a bar in terms of what types of grant applications could be eligible. And the reason I say that is because we're at a stage here with Open RAN where we're looking for greater investment and accelerating the technology. And I think if we make the bar too high, then there's a potential that it could have a negative effect on the types of applications that are submitted to NTIA. So I'll give, so not that we're against any of the recommendations that were made this morning, but there are some areas where, if we make the requirements too strict, it just may have an effect on the types of requests that are submitted and the types of projects that get funded. And I think it's important to keep an open mind.
Thanks. Tracy, do you also have your hand up and want to provide another comment? Okay. I believe Claire, you have your hand up. Can you state your full name and the organization you're with before you make your comment?
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Philip, for the opportunity to speak. Hi, everyone. This is Claire Yang. I'm the Chief of Staff with Silicon Harlan. We are an infrastructure connectivity company and an ISP that's based in New York. We have experience with interoperable network and also working on testbed of Open RAN, all the innovation that's being discussed today. I just have a quick point about thinking in terms of the Open RAN and other technology in an ecosystem perspective. One example is at Silicon Harlan here, we have worked in a 5G and beyond testbed that's based in Upper Manhattan. The full name of the testbed is called Cosmos, which stands for Cloud Enhanced Open Software Defined Mobile Wireless Testbed for city scale deployment. And one unique element that we integrated in this deployment is making sure that we include education and workforce development so that whatever security and standards and specifications that were developed as the part of this testing and the part of this development, we can make sure, we are also building up the workforce, building up the next generation of researchers that can actually work on this project. Another unique element that we integrated into this testbed is we make sure that we included the local community. Following our philosophy of using community as a platform, we actually were able to work with a group of public school teachers here in our local school district so that they can integrate the learnings and toolkits from the research testbed into their public school STEM education. And every year we have the group of students presenting their results, learning from the testbed. So this is all a great opportunity to not only benefit the emerging vendors, but also the local community and the local talent that can support really the next generation innovation. And Silicon Harlan has the expertise in this area, so we're open to partnership from folks here on the call as well. Thank you so much, Philip.
Yeah, thanks for your comments. And I would also just say, at NTIA, we are also running a set of programs focused on digital equity as well through our Internet for All initiative. and that includes both programs through the state, but also direct grant programs as well that you should look at, because certainly I think a lot of the stuff that you were talking about relates to, in some ways, both this program and that program as well. So I believe next up we have Monisha Ghosh. I'm sorry. Do you want to unmute your mic and introduce yourself and your organization?
Sure. Thank you very much for the opportunity. My name is Monisha Ghosh. I'm a professor of electrical engineering at the University of Notre Dame and the Policy Outreach Director for SpectrumX, which is NSF's first funded center on spectrum innovation. There have been some really interesting points brought out, and I've been listening in to all of the comments so far. I would like to emphasize, though, that as an innovation fund, I would encourage NTIA to look forwards beyond the immediate needs. Clearly, interoperability and multi-vendor testing is a need that we have today to make sure that Open RAN gets deployed over the next few months to maybe less than a year. However, let's not lose sight of the longer term picture of where we are going with cellular networks. We are going to be moving into new frequency bands. We are going to be looking at more shared spectrum. And we need to figure out how we continue to evolve an Open RAN architecture that can perform as well in different spectrum realities as it will do under the purely licensed regime. So we already have specifications for 5GNR in unlicensed bands, and I haven't heard too many people talking about developing Open RAN architectures that could deal with those situations. FR3 has already been brought up in terms of where 3GPP is going next with new frequency bands, which will be probably the 7 to 24 gigahertz. There are different challenges there. So I would definitely encourage NTIA to keep in mind the longer viewpoint of how we evolve Open RAN to work with new radio technologies and new spectrums. Thanks.
Thank you very much for those comments. And I would just remind folks, while this session is focused on the Innovation Fund, we also have the work that we do on spectrum policy. And I think we've announced a forthcoming RFC around a national spectrum strategy focused on a broad array of spectrum bands and trying to build that spectrum pipeline for needs, not just now, but far into the future. And so folks should keep that on their radar as well. I think we have one last person who has their hand up, Michael Zappi with Pi Radio. I don't know if you still have comments. Do you want to unmute yourself and then introduce yourself and your organization again in case folks did not hear you when you spoke last time?
Hear me?
Yep.
Excellent. And my colleague Aditya spoke last time, but one of the big things that gets left out in the supply chain is the supply chain of knowledgeable workers who have a deep understanding of the technology that they're working with and can go from there to bring about innovation. And that is, as well, one of our big goals is to provide experimentation platforms to provide for education or industry for people to achieve this deep insight into what they're working with and to be able to play about and come up with new ideas and new ways of pushing the industry forward and the boundaries of technology and science. Thank you.
Thanks for those comments. I don't see any other hands up in the queue. If folks have any other comments, please raise your hand now. Otherwise, we're going to close the session. No hands. Okay, going once. Oh, Jeff Reed, I see you have your hand up. Do you want to unmute your mic and introduce yourself and your organization?
Hi, I'm Jeff Reed. I'm a faculty member at Virginia Tech. I'm also the CTO of the Commonwealth Cyber Initiative that has a 72-node ORAN testbed in Arlington, Virginia. And one of the things that I wanted to say is that when we talk about an ecosystem, an important part of that ecosystem is trained people, just like we previously heard. And ORAN represents a really disruptive way of creating this cellular infrastructure. And I think we need to have a concerted plan for how we're going to develop the workforce, both with training and education. And this is going to be very important because there's not that many people who really understand ORAN. Thanks.
Thank you, and certainly a great point there too. I see that, is that Hongwei? I'm sorry, your last name just, Zhang, did you have your hand up and want to make a comment? If so, can you unmute your mic and state your name and the organization you're with?
Sure. This is Hongwei Zhang, professor of computer engineering at Iowa State University. I'm also leading one of the power platforms that Tommaso mentioned earlier. We focus on supporting research and innovation and education in rural broadband. So I want to just kind of provide a rural, I guess, perspective for the Open RAN effort. I guess in the past decades, right, including the most recent, I guess, broadband fund from NTIA, we have been focusing a lot about try to expand the broadband connectivity to the rural regions. Mostly try to use the technologies that have been developed for the probably likely urban centers like fiber and so on. So in a way, I think this Open RAN initiative can actually help enable the community to develop solutions that specifically target the rural use cases and challenges. I think that would be a great opportunity for us to hopefully leverage as we explore the implementation strategies. So I guess my feedback to NTIA would be to, as we explore the implementation and so on, also see if we can actually align this effort with other major initiatives we have been leading, right? Providing an innovation focus to that, and also leveraging the existing test bed and also enable building the capacity, innovation capacity in the rural regions to help support the initiative. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think we've got time for one last comment. Tracy, I saw your hand up. Do you want to unmute your mic and introduce yourself and your organization? Tracy, are you there? Do you want to unmute your mic?
Am I unmuted?
Yes.
Oh, okay. I just wanted to mention that we've had a couple of speakers from the National Science Foundation Platform Advanced Wireless Research Initiative. And I just wanted to mention that NSF power sites have been especially supportive of US-based operator efforts to conduct proofs of concepts, to hold plugfests. As a matter of fact, both Cosmos, New York City, New Jersey metro area, and Powder, Salt Lake City metro area have supported ORAN plugfests for the past few years. As well as today, we have an NSF power site is an ORAN testing and integration center, and that's actually co-hosted by AT&T and Dish. And of course, Hongwei is very much appreciated for contributing to an ORAN event in the spring of 2022.
Great, thank you so much. So we are out of time. Thank you everyone for your contributions. On behalf of the entire team, I want to thank you all for your time. to dial in and participate in today's listening session. Stakeholder engagement is such a critical piece of the work we do here at NTI, and we look forward to leveraging today's discussions as we continue to develop this historic program. As a reminder, our request for comment closes this Friday, and we would encourage all stakeholders and everyone on the call to submit feedback via the process as well if you haven't done so already. Some folks brought this question up today, but we've received several questions about what's meant by security reporting in the RFC question 17A. Security reporting in this case is the reporting of security vulnerabilities of work being undertaken by a grantee to include, for example, plans on how a grantee will report and mitigate security vulnerabilities in their proposal. We hope this provides some clarification. As always, the team can be reached at innovationfund@ntia.gov with any questions in the meantime. Thank you all again for joining us, and we look forward to being in touch. Thanks again, and this concludes our listening session. Have a great day.